All righty. Good morning, everyone. So today's topic is the old gives way to the new. Somehow I had pictures of people pushing people out of the way in those shopping malls, but no, that's not what we're seeing today. So the year is going to be 2020, and what's the first thing you think of? Clear vision. Isn't it? My sister thought of the program, the 2020 program on TV. I go, no, honey, perfect vision. Seeing with clarity. Oh, yay. So have you already made up your resolutions, or have you lumped them with your troubles like Reverend Kathy was talking about earlier? I liked that. May your troubles go with your resolutions or something like that. It was really wonderful. So 2020 is our chance to have perfect vision, isn't it? Clarity of vision. We get to kind of determine what we want to do and how we want to see our life, and if things aren't working out, where we want to go, right? So we get to kind of do an assessment. I love the beginning of the year because if you take an opportunity to just look back and think, what have I done, and like what worked and what didn't work, and if I'm not feeling really happy, how can I change that? And the beauty of this teaching says, you know, we are in control of our own lives, but not only that, that there is a power out there in the world for good that we use every day because we're one with that power. And that power is what we initiate and we use in back of everything that we do. So it's not that we have to do it all by ourselves, even though you can raise your hand if you think you do, because a lot of people out there, including myself, sometimes think, I have to do it all by myself. It's like, oh, wait, I forgot. There's this power for good in the universe that I can use. And that power is that all oneness. But that's what we call like our personal relationship with God, isn't it? It's saying that, you know, God and I are one, it's all God. We have all these beautiful sayings, but we need to take it inside, don't we? We need to actually believe that. I like to think of it as a come as you are with God, because right where I am not only is God, but I have to, the relationship that I have with God is I am one with God, so what I am is God expressing. So the moment I do that, I have to realize, okay, but I have to be right in the here and now. It has to be just as I am, not when I've read more books or become more enlightened or become more successful or become my ideal weight or whatever it is. It's right as I am right now. I'm using that power of God, however I want to use it. So then I get to think about, how am I using it? So I was thinking about the laws of nature. And in the laws of nature, they literally have dismantled the idea that anything that came before doesn't have to be the way it is now, right? So in the laws of nature, Ernest Holmes has that beautiful fancy schmancy saying that says, principle is not bound by precedent. And basically, in a nutshell, what that means is what happened before doesn't have to determine our present circumstances. And we all go, oh yeah, I believe that, but take a look at your life for a second. Are there any areas in your life that you have a sense of limitation or a sense of it's never going to work out? And are you owning it? I mean, is it something that you've just done by rote, or do you know about that? I mean, have you thought about, gosh, I don't have to have the same kind of experiences over and over again. I don't have to keep having the same crummy relationships or jobs that don't recognize who I am, or friendships that aren't developed, or we don't have good communication skills, right? We can think about, I don't need to create that every time over and over again. This teaching reminds us, guess what? Yesterday ended last night. And we can start with a clean slate right now. And what it is we can reverse the effect that the patterns have had on our life, right? So principle is not bound by precedent in nature. Nature doesn't know anything about precedent. Think about all the discoveries and inventions. Think about the light bulb. Think about, now they may have been born out of an evolution of thought, but the light bulb came along, then the telephone. Think about the cell phone. Do you remember the cell phones when they first came out and they were those big honking things that I remember watching a guy walking down the street thinking, holy cats, that is just crazy. That's never gonna fly. And look at us now. Look at us now. The other day on the news, there was a story about a guy that has a chip in his hand and he can unlock his Tesla. And I thought, oh my Lord. Not only that, he can sign on to his computer and he can share contacts from his computer by a chip that he had put in his hand. And I thought, now think about it. 5 years ago, that is absolutely impossible. Now, maybe in the sci-fi movies it's possible, but for everyday life, you think, no, right? But I remember debit cards. Remember when the thought of debit cards came out? I remember this guy telling me, there's going to be a time when we're not going to use cash or checks for anything. We're going to use these little cards. We're going to put them in machines. I'm like, there is no way that's happening. And look at it now. I mean, where would you be without your debit card? I mean, it's evolved, hasn't it? It has evolved. Principle wasn't bound by precedent. I mean, things evolve and become, right? But it's the same with spiritual laws, isn't it? It's the same with saying, you know what? If I generally affirm yesterday ended last night, then whatever it is that's troubling me, guess what? Who's in charge? Who's in the driver's seat? But many times we give the driver's seat over to somebody else, don't we? We say, our boss determines our salary or our worth, or, our friends are critical of something or other, and then they kind of determine what I should be doing, or our parents, or whoever it is, right? We give that power away, but we forget, hey, that's right, I am in charge of my life. There's a saying that we probably all know, be ye transformed by the renewal of your mind, right? And that was said by the Apostle Paul, right? Be ye transformed by the renewal of your mind. You go, that's so beautiful. I'm renewed by the transforming of my mind, which means I get to think again. I get to think about what is it that I truly want to create in my experience, and why isn't it here and now, right? But the first part, the first sentence before that, be ye transformed by the renewal of your mind, is, do not conform to the patterns of the world. Do not conform to the patterns of the world, but be ye renewed by the transforming of your mind. Feel the difference? So it's saying, don't go along with what everybody's saying. Somebody's going to tell you, you're never going to get that job. You're never going to be able to buy that car. My sister bought a car yesterday. Yay! And she's like, I go, get it out of your mind that you can't buy it. I go, the perfect car is calling to you. And she found one, and it's awesome, and it's ruby red. And so she wanted a red car, so she's very excited. I found it. Of course she did. Because guess what? We set an intention, don't we? And that intention goes out into what we call the law. And what's the law? The law is God in action, isn't it? The law is saying, whatever it is that you desire, I will create for you. But first, you have to believe that's true, right? Because if you don't have a belief that things are going to happen the way you declare them, what's going to happen? Nothing. And then you'll coast and go, I didn't get that job. Well, of course you didn't, because you didn't believe that you could. You had some restrictions in your mind, or some limitations that you thought about, and those limitations and restrictions held you back. So if we're willing to clean the slate and say, you know what, I want a do-over here. I don't like the way this relationship is going, or I don't like my job, or whatever it is you feel limited by. Think about it that, hey, if God is all there is, and I initiate that power of God in me and declare it, and I release whatever it is that I want to release, it happens, doesn't it? I was looking at, I'm about to paint the metal awnings on my house, but they have this like alligator effect. I didn't know that was actually a term, but that's what the painter said. It's an alligator effect. But what you've got to do is you've got to scrape off that old stuff, because if you just paint over it, it's going to be all lumpy and look kind of weird, but it also won't adhere as well, right? So you've got to clear off the old stuff. But in order to clear off the old stuff, you have to know what the old stuff is, don't you? I mean, how can you just let go? You can change a pattern, an effect. You can reverse the effect that your patterns have had on you. But how do you do it? By planting new seeds, by thinking new thoughts, by saying, what is it that I really do want to create in my life? Now, in the first service, the 9 a.m. service, how many of you have been to the 9 a.m. service? Oh, quite a few. There is a segment in there that I feel is really powerful. And in that segment, people call out what it is that they desire to create in their experience. And it's really powerful for a number of reasons. So I'm going to invite you right now. You can say it in a whisper, you can say it in your mind, or you could call it out. Call out some things that you'd like to create for 2020. remember, this is the waitress taking your order and saying, whatever it is you want, so call it out. Okay, now think about this for a second. What you just did was you stated your claim, you put it out there, you released it, you surrendered, right? You surrendered it because you have to give it up. And the moment that you've surrendered that, right, you've opened an influx for Spirit to come in and fill with, oh, is that what you want? And you were willing to let go of the opposite of that? So now that influx has come in and will create what it is you desire, right? So the idea is you let go of the old and you accept the new. And I'm going to close with a quote from one of my favorite authors, John O'Donohue, and he says, "Let us bless this new year for what it has brought to us, for the love and for the loss, and for the quiet way that it has brought us closer to our invisible destination. Happy New Year and Happy New You." Thank you, thank you. Thank you. I'm going to welcome up Reverend Catherine now, and she's going to continue with our amazing talks.
Thank you. Oh, that's right, I got it. So Reverend Mary and I are tag teaming today. We have the same topic, the old gives way to the new. And you've actually already heard several comments about the old giving way to the new. And I think it's interesting that at this time of year, we have to decide that this current year that we're in is the old one. And we have to call it that because the one that's coming is going to be the new one. And so along with that, there's all kinds of things that get written in the newspapers and in magazines, and you have to do anything, number one. It is, and that isn't what it was to start with. It's that the old gives way to the new, which to me implies that we have a choice. Ernest Holmes was writing in the Beverly Hills lectures, and this is in 1952. He actually was speaking, and what he spoke was written down. And he was talking about new things. He was talking about science of mind as a new thing at the time. And he said, now the underlying philosophy of science of mind is ancient. It goes back before Jesus as well as the words of Jesus. He said, but this idea that Jesus had of what you believe is what you experience in your life was actually written down only starting, as he said in 52, only written down about 100 years ago when someone started taking this idea that if our thought is what creates our experience, then can't we just erase that thought? Can't we get rid of that thought or change that thought? And this was someone named Quimby who started doing this, and he tried a lot of different things. But ultimately, he discovered that yes, he could. And that was the beginning of a whole lot of learning and metaphysical thinking that led to, by the mid-teens, Ernest Holmes discovering some of these things and writing in the 1920s the Science of Mind textbook. And it was new, and it was very new, and it was a new concept. And so in 52, he says, and so now, this has been around 100 years, and he's not claiming the birth of it. He knows he's simply built on many other things. But he says in 52 that 15 to 20 million people embraced this concept. It was new, it wasn't written down, it wasn't understood in the way we do, and now there are this many people who actually embrace that. So in thinking about that, he's thinking about how we do this. He's thinking about the difficulty, because at this point, he's been practicing and teaching and talking for some 30 years himself. And he's recognizing psychology that's come into play. He's recognizing the reasons, perhaps, why this idea of changing your thinking so that you can change your life hasn't been as simple as it might be. So one of the things he talks about is there was a contemporary then psychologist who had come up with a phrase, keeping in mind that Ernest Holmes had already had the fancy schmancy principle that is not determined by precedent. He'd already said that in his books, but this psychologist comes up and talks about our resistance to change, and he calls it inertia of the patterns of thought that we have. Inertia of thought patterns. And that is something that interested me. When we were in Alabama, we were in several different places, and I had several conversations with people that really struck me. One person, and I will say candidly, was actually talking about something that was important to him because it had to do with his own child, his daughter. And it had to do, the topic was transgender. And his child was expressing in this way. And he was very, very much, had so much energy in denying that this was even a thing. And so I was talking with him, and I was not disagreeing with him. I was simply talking to him, answering him questions. But I couldn't help but note the energy that he had around that. And he just seemed it seemed important to him that he maintain whatever it was that he had always believed. I noticed that. And the only thing I actually suggested to him was that he remembers how much he loves his daughter, and that respecting her as his daughter and loving her is all he ever really needs to do. And that was the end of that particular conversation. And then, as circumstance would have it, we were in a different place, different set of people, a topic came up again like that. Again, there was this energy about why this is just not true. I can't understand that. I do not think that that is the way things are. Again, I was struck by that, what I was calling then as the refusal to have a new thought, whereas Ernest Holmes, psychiatrist or psychologist, had called it inertia of thought patterns. And so what I have also learned about a lot of things is that entrenchment of the thought patterns that we have. On one of our transcontinental flights, I had the opportunity to rewatch a lovely movie called Inside Out, where it talks about the motions of the inside expressing outside. And indeed, we are, this teaching, our own way of being, is an inside-out operation. And I remember in the class I was teaching this fall, we talked about this, and I talked about this mind study, brain study that's been done at the University of San Francisco. And the science writer that I was reading and talking about this said, he said, this is actually a bleak picture of the way we think. He prefaced it all by saying that way. So what he's saying that we do, and their studies where they've tested people and looked at things, one of the things that he had noticed was that when we're given a project or a question or something that we want to parse out, our lobes, different lobes in our brain, set to work doing all kinds of figuring and estimating and trying to figure how to sort this out. Ultimately, they all come together and serve up to the conscious mind the solution for this problem, and the conscious mind believes that it was in control the whole time. And the brain work and study that they've done says it's not so. It was all an unconscious process that came up, oh, I have the idea. Now, that's what he said was bleak about it, that we think that we are in control of what we're thinking and doing when maybe we aren't. The inertia of thought patterns is what comes into play. So how do we manage all of this? Well, there's therapy. I have no problem with therapy, and there is counseling, which we absolutely do. But our teaching says that there is a way for us to handle this. But first of all, we have to have recognition of what it is that we might want to change. Now, I go back to those encounters with my relatives, and what struck me about them was that energy that they were putting into this almost anger, but not quite, just this energy. They were uncomfortable. I think that any of us, when we are confronted with our own thinking, our own expression, even our actions sometimes, that we get that energy, we need to hold on to that point of view. It's important that you know what I think and that you understand why I believe that this is so. If we can catch ourselves in that, that's that first step. That's recognition. We are recognition that this is an area that for whatever reason, that divine pattern that is within us is out of sync with what we're expressing and what we're saying. So that's the first step, recognition. So what do we do after that? Well, Reverend Kathy talked about a number of spiritual practices, and all of us can just sit still and be quiet, as she suggested. We also teach spiritual mind treatment, meditation, contemplation, reading, journaling, any one of those, combinations of those. That's the way that we get in and discover what it is we want to discover about ourselves. And that is, to me, how this is an inside out. We can be surprised at what can come to us in meditation or just being quiet when we really listen. We can even be surprised what we write in our journals sometimes. I think that has happened to me, so if it's happened to me, it can happen to anyone. This is a spiritual practice that is that inside-out concept. But most of all, that recognition that we want to change is powerful. As Reverend Mary says, we set our intention that we want to be different. I'm also reminded when I remember one of the things from Troward, where he says when you want to change a thought or a belief, you're cutting a new channel of thought, remembering that that old one is kind of deep, and the water's going to want to go down the deep one before it goes to that new one that you've dug. And that's the spiritual practice. That's the maintaining of what you want to be in your life. That is that persistence of a change of thought that you stay with until it becomes your own. So I guess the question that you're asking yourselves maybe this time of year and today is there something that you know that you would like to change? And I'm asking that question. Is there a thing that you want to change? No, maybe. And so if there is, then I invite you to consider the different ways that you can change your thinking and be that new and improved thought process that you want to see in your life. So I invite you to affirm with me. There are things that I know I can change in my life. Give me this day everything I need. Help me to not be tempted by appearances. I am grateful that God always hears my prayer. And so I say, And so it is. Thank you so much for being here. This is the time in our service when we often recognize our mission statement and we share messages that people have shared with us about how this teaching has changed their lives. We are picking up some things from that demonstration box out there, so if you're so inclined, please add to that. This one came in the mail. I had to let you know that I'm finally coming into my own as an artist, and I owe it all to the Science of Mind teaching. It's given me confidence to pursue what I thought was out of my reach. Never could I have imagined that people would commission me to paint their pets because I had set aside my ambition to be a painter of any description years ago. Taking Science of Mind classes was the best thing I ever did for myself. Yes, it took a while for everything to fall into place, but we know everything happens in its own time. I invest a lot into each painting, allowing Spirit to work through me to do the very best work I can do. Our teaching has given me the awareness and peace to know I am not in competition with any other artists. I honor Divine Spirit and know that the law of attraction sends clients my way. I used to say that I wanted to be the Grandma Moses of cat and dog painting. Now I say, I am the Grandma Moses of cat and dog painting. I own it. Isn't that wonderful?